A disoriented millionaire in the subway is helped by a woman, and what's revealed later is chilling. A routine day, a desperate look, and everything changes in a matter of seconds. Laura, a middle-aged woman, finds herself entangled in a mystery after an encounter in the New York subway. Hannah, a frightened and lost young woman, carries secrets that could destroy lives. Amid invisible threats and unexpected alliances, Laura needs to act fast. But what's really happening? Stay tuned to find out how this story of courage and survival will keep you hooked from start to finish. New York City buzzed with its usual energy. The lights shone as if the very sky had decided to descend to earth, and the sounds of horns, voices, and footsteps formed a unique urban symphony. It was a morning like any other for Laura, a middle-aged woman, with a common appearance but eyes that revealed the experience of someone who had faced many battles in life. She took the subway as she did daily, the same monotonous route between Brooklyn and Manhattan, where she worked as an administrative assistant in a small office. However, behind her routine, Laura carried a burden that few knew about. Widowed for 3 years, she dedicated herself entirely to work to fill the void left by her loss. Her days were a repetition of mechanical tasks, and her only comfort came from silently observing the people around her during her subway rides. She tried to guess the stories behind each face, seeking to distract herself from the loneliness that had accompanied her since her husband's death. As she entered the train car that morning, Laura quickly found a seat. The journey was long, and she always used this time to relax and observe the people around her. But that day, something unusual caught her attention. A young woman, clearly disoriented, entered the car. Her blonde hair was impeccably styled, and her clothes were elegant, standing out from the surrounding environment. But something was wrong. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked around as if she were lost and scared, completely out of place in that space. Laura couldn't take her eyes off her. There was something about this woman that intrigued her, a mix of vulnerability and desperation that reminded her of past times when she herself had felt lost in life. The young woman seemed like a millionaire, with her expensive clothes and discreet but bright jewelry. However, something didn't add up. She was alone, with no companion, and her expression was one of pure fear. Determined not to ignore what was happening, Laura stood up and approached the young woman. "Hi, are you okay?" she asked softly, trying not to scare her further. The young woman looked at her, her large blue eyes filled with confusion. There was a hesitation, as if she were trying to decide if she could trust this stranger. I don't know where I am," the young woman replied, her voice trembling. "My name is Hannah. I was kidnapped, but I escaped. I don't know how to get home. I don't know who to trust." Laura felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a casual encounter. Something much darker was happening. "My God, you're safe now. I'm going to help you," Laura said, trying to stay calm while understanding the gravity of the situation. "How did you get here? Are you hurt?" Hannah shook her head, looking disoriented. "They kept me locked up for days. I think they wanted money. I'm the heir to a large fortune, but I escaped. I managed to escape. But they're still out there, somewhere, and I don't know what to do." The revelation was chilling. Laura realized she was facing something much bigger than just a lost young woman. There was real danger, and the fear in Hannah's eyes was genuine. Laura's heart raced at the thought of what could have happened, and what could still happen. "We need to go to the police right now," Laura said, trying to think clearly. Hannah looked around, still frightened, but nodded. "But what if they're waiting for me? What if—" Laura held Hannah's hand firmly. "I won't let anything happen to you. We'll handle this together." The decision was made. Laura knew she needed to act quickly before fear completely paralyzed Hannah. Without wasting any time, she began guiding the young woman out of the subway, determined to take her to a safe place. As they hurriedly walked through the streets of New York, the weight of the situation began to sink into Laura. She wasn't a rich or powerful woman, But at that moment, she knew she was the only person Hannah could trust, and she wasn't going to let her down. The streets of New York passed by quickly as Laura and Hannah walked side by side. Laura's mind was racing, but she tried to stay calm. Each step was an attempt to distance themselves from the terror the young woman had just described. Deep down, a persistent unease grew, as if the reality around them was unraveling, revealing a dark side of the city she never imagined knowing. Hannah remained silent, her hand trembling slightly in Laura's, which only intensified the sense of urgency. She was a woman of sophisticated appearance, clearly out of her element, lost in the midst of the crowd that didn't seem to notice her state. The confusion in her eyes betrayed that the situation was still unreal to her, like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake up. "I don't know how this happened," murmured Hannah finally, her voice low with emotion. "It was supposed to be a family dinner, something ordinary, but they were there. They took me and—" Laura squeezed Hannah's hand, encouraging her to continue. She felt there was something more, something crucial that the young woman was trying to convey. She knew this feeling well, the inability to find the right words, the sense that the world was crumbling around you. So many times, she herself had faced moments like this, where everything seemed out of her control. They were friends of my family, people I've trusted all my life. Hannah continued, her voice trembling. They put me in a car and took me to a dark place, far from the city. I thought I was going to die there. Laura felt the blood run cold in her veins. This woman, a millionaire heir to a fortune, kidnapped by those who were supposed to protect her. It was as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. "Hannah, you said you managed to escape. How did that happen? Did they hurt you?" Hannah bit her lips, the internal struggle evident on her face. They were arguing about what to do with me. They talked about money, blackmail. One of them wanted to kill me, saying it was safer that way, but the others didn't agree. There was a fight among them, and I managed to flee through the back door. I ran as fast as I could, without looking back. The tension increased with every word. Laura struggled not to let the panic she was beginning to feel show. The crowded streets seemed to close in around them, as if the very buildings were complicit in that dark secret. Every face that passed by now seemed more threatening, every corner a possible lurking danger. They reached the local police station, an old, imposing building where the city's sounds seemed muffled by the weight of the stories held within. Laura felt a slight hesitation from Hannah as they approached the entrance. Perhaps it was the fear of being once again under the scrutiny of strangers, or perhaps it was the uncertainty about what would happen next. As soon as they entered, Laura asked to speak to an officer immediately. They were taken to a small interview room, where a detective with a serious face and tired eyes awaited them. He introduced himself as Detective Morgan, a man who seemed to carry the weight of many unsolved cases on his shoulders. "So, you said you were kidnapped?" Morgan asked Hannah directly, his gaze analyzing every detail of the young woman's face. "Can you tell me everything that happened? From the beginning?" Hannah took a deep breath, her voice trembling with anxiety. "I was kidnapped by people I know, that my family knows. They took me to a house outside the city and kept me there for days. They wanted money, they wanted to threaten my family. But I escaped. I don't know who to trust." The detective listened carefully, taking notes in a well-worn notebook. His eyes narrowed at a certain point, as if something was beginning to make sense to him. When Hannah finished recounting her experience, Morgan set his pen aside and looked directly at her. "You mentioned they were close people. Could you tell me who?" The room fell silent for what seemed like an eternity. Hannah finally found the courage to respond, the words coming out with difficulty. "They were trusted friends, business partners of my family, people my father considers like brothers. I never suspected anything." Laura, until then silent, felt the gravity of the revelation. This was deeper than anything she had imagined when she approached Hannah in the subway. The people the young woman trusted, who were supposed to protect her, were involved in a scheme to destroy her. The detective also seemed to have been affected by the information, quickly standing up. "This is very serious, Miss Hannah. We need to act quickly," he said, now with a more determined tone. "Don't worry. We'll investigate thoroughly and ensure these people are held accountable. But we need to keep you safe in the meantime. Do you know if they have any way to track you?" Hannah shook her head, but the fear was still etched on her face. Laura, feeling the need to offer some comfort, intervened. "She can stay with me until this is resolved. I won't let anything happen to her." Detective Morgan agreed, recognizing the determination in Laura. "That's a good idea. We'll keep you informed and provide additional security, but we'll need as many details as possible to proceed." As the detective's words echoed through the room, a new wave of anxiety washed over Hannah. Laura squeezed her hand once more, trying to convey the security the young woman so desperately needed at that moment. She knew this was only the tip of the iceberg and that things would only get more complicated from here. But she also knew that, somehow, she was prepared to face whatever came. The heat of the small interview room was becoming uncomfortable, and the muffled sound of footsteps and voices from the outer hallway seemed to heighten the tension hanging in the air. Hannah remained still, absorbing every word she had said, as if replaying the memories made the terror even more real. Laura, by her side, felt the weight of responsibility growing on her shoulders, a feeling she wasn't prepared to ignore. Detective Morgan, after noting down the most important details, closed the notebook and looked intently at Hannah. His gaze was intense, but also carried a certain understanding, as if he had witnessed countless times what fear and betrayal could do to a person. "Miss Hannah, now that we know who's behind this, we need to act quickly. We can't risk giving these people more time to do something against you or your family." Hannah silently agreed, her eyes full of uncertainty, while Laura felt the chill down her spine only intensifying. The young woman seemed to be trying to process the seriousness of the situation, struggling to find a foothold amidst the chaos. "They're powerful, detective. They have contacts everywhere. What if they try to do something while we're here?" "That's why we're going to ensure you're safe," Morgan replied, with firmness in his voice. "I already have a team assigned to investigate further, but in the meantime, we can't let them know where you are. It's crucial that you stay out of sight." Hannah seemed to hesitate, as if the reality of her situation was finally beginning to sink in. Laura, feeling the need to reassure her, intervened. "We'll go to my house, Hannah. It's a simple place, but it's safe. You don't need to worry. We won't let anything happen to you." Hannah looked at Laura, and for a brief moment, her eyes revealed silent gratitude. It was as if, amidst all the darkness, she had found a small light of hope. "Thank you, Laura. I don't know how to thank you." Laura smiled, trying to dissipate the heavy atmosphere. "There's no need to thank me. Let's focus on keeping you safe and let the police handle the rest." Detective Morgan stood up and extended his hand to Hannah, who held it with a firm but trembling grip. "Miss Hannah, we're going to take care of this, but I'll ask that you trust us and follow the instructions we give you. The more you cooperate, the quicker we can resolve this situation." With a nod, Hannah accepted the detective's words, while Laura mentally prepared for what was to come. She knew this was only the beginning of a long journey, and that the road ahead would be full of dangers. However, Laura also felt a growing determination within her. There was something in Hannah that reminded her of herself in past times, and this connection gave her the strength to move forward. As they left the police station, the world around them seemed somehow different. The crowd of New York, always so chaotic and indifferent, now seemed almost threatening. Every face that passed was a potential danger, every corner a new threat. Laura kept Hannah close to her, as if the simple touch was enough to protect the young woman from all the evil surrounding her. They took a taxi, with Laura giving clear instructions for the driver to take them directly to her home in Brooklyn. As the car pulled away from the station, Laura could feel the tension in the air slightly lessen, but it was still far from completely dissipating. Hannah remained silent, looking out the window, lost in thoughts that Laura couldn't guess. It was as if a weight was on her shoulders, and Laura didn't know if she would be able to carry it along with her. During the ride, Laura's phone rang. It was Detective Morgan. "Miss Laura, just to inform you, we're already mobilizing a discreet surveillance team near your house. We need to ensure that if these kidnappers try something, we can act quickly. We'll also place some undercover officers around the area." "I understand," Laura replied, trying to stay calm. "And what about the investigation? Do you have any leads?" "Yes," replied the detective, his voice carrying a tone of seriousness. "We've gathered some preliminary information. It seems the people involved are influential figures with connections in various places. But we're working to dismantle this network before they can react." The call ended, and Laura turned her attention back to Hannah, who was still staring out of the car, her face expressionless but with a lost look. "You're going to be okay?" Laura said softly, trying to convey confidence. "We're going to get through this together." Hannah looked away from the window and finally met Laura's eyes. There was something there, a mix of fear, exhaustion, and perhaps a bit of hope. "I don't know what's going to happen, Laura, but I'm grateful you're here. I just want this to be over soon." The car finally stopped in front of Laura's house, a small, simple but cozy residence. It was the kind of place where Laura had always found peace after long days of work. Now, that space would have to serve as a refuge, not just for her but for a young woman who was running from real danger. As they entered the house, Laura couldn't help but feel the responsibility she had taken on. Hannah's life was now in her hands, and she couldn't fail. She locked the door behind her, making sure everything was secure. Even though the police were involved, she knew that, in the end, it would be her determination and courage that would keep Hannah safe until everything was resolved. Laura's house was small but cozy. Its walls were decorated with old photos, furniture worn by time, and the familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee made the place a refuge for anyone needing peace. But at that moment, the air seemed heavy with an almost tangible tension. Laura guided Hannah inside, feeling the silence that surrounded them. "You can stay in the guest room," Laura said softly, pointing to the door at the end of the hallway. "It's simple, but I think it will be comfortable for you." Hannah agreed, but her eyes seemed distant, as if she were still trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. She headed to the room, her steps almost imperceptible, while Laura remained in the living room, trying to organize her thoughts. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, her life was following a common rhythm, without major surprises. Now, suddenly, she was involved in something that seemed straight out of a suspense movie. When Laura finally allowed herself to sit down, her mind began working at 100 miles an hour. She knew the danger still lurked, that the kidnappers might be nearby, trying to find Hannah. And even with the police presence, the sense of vulnerability was hard to ignore. She needed to be alert, ready to act at any moment. Minutes later, Hannah returned to the living room. She had changed out of her elegant clothes into something simpler that Laura had offered. I don't know what to do now," the young woman confessed, her voice breaking the silence with a fragility that Laura had not yet seen. "All of this, it's like a nightmare." Laura approached, gently placing a hand on Hannah's shoulder. "I know it seems impossible, but we'll get through this, Hannah. The most important thing now is to stay calm and let the police do their job." Hannah sighed, trying to control the tears threatening to fall. "I just want this to be over. I never imagined that people I trusted could do something like this. I feel so lost, so scared." "It's normal to feel that way," Laura responded, her voice low and comforting. "You've been through something horrible, something no one should go through, but you're not alone. I'm here, and I'll help you get through this in any way I can." Before Hannah could respond, the sound of the phone ringing echoed through the room, interrupting the moment of calm. Laura quickly answered, her heart racing, fearing it might be some bad news. "Miss Laura," Detective Morgan's voice came from the other side of the line, filled with seriousness. "I have urgent information. We managed to identify the kidnappers and trace their locations. They're in a house on the outskirts of the city. Unfortunately, this situation is more complicated than we imagined." Laura felt a shiver run down her spine. "More complicated? What do you mean by that?" "It seems these people have deeper connections than we thought," Morgan continued, without mincing words. "We're talking about individuals with influence, both in the business world and in politics. This means that any action we take needs to be extremely careful not to alert them before we have enough evidence." The weight of the detective's words made Laura feel as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. Influential people? That meant the danger was even greater, that those after Hannah had the power to manipulate situations and potentially escape the consequences. "What do you suggest, Detective? How can we protect Hannah if these people have so much power?" Laura's voice was firm but carried the concern of someone who knows they are dealing with something much bigger than themselves. "My suggestion is that you maintain the utmost discretion. I'll arrange for an escort to ensure you're safe, but avoid leaving the house or communicating with anyone who isn't absolutely trustworthy. We'll act quickly, but we need to be strategic," Morgan replied, the urgency clear in his tone. "Understood," Laura said, trying to absorb all the information. "We'll do exactly as you said." When the call ended, Laura turned to Hannah, who was watching her with anxious eyes, waiting for an explanation. "They found the kidnappers, Hannah," Laura said, trying to keep her voice calm. "But the situation is more dangerous than we thought. They are influential people with important connections. We need to be careful." Hannah seemed to absorb the words slowly, as if she needed time to understand what this meant. "Influential people? Does that mean they could get away with it? That they won't be punished for what they did?" Laura approached Hannah, holding her hands firmly. "Don't worry about that now. The most important thing is your safety. The police will do their best to bring them to justice, but we need to keep you out of harm's way. Trust me, we're doing what's necessary." Hannah agreed, but the fear was still evident in her eyes. "I trust you, Laura. I just don't know if I can trust anyone else." The following hours dragged on in tense silence, where every noise seemed like an indicator of something bad. Laura and Hannah stayed together in the small living room, as if simply being close to each other could keep away the shadows that seemed to surround them. The night finally fell, and the world outside continued its pace, indifferent to what was happening in the lives of these two women. Later, Laura prepared a simple meal, trying to bring a bit of normalcy to the chaos they had lived through. But the silence remained heavy, as if a curtain of uncertainties had settled between them. With each bite, with each sigh, the fear remained there, an unwanted guest that refused to leave. When the night deepened, the two prepared to sleep, although sleep was a distant promise. Laura gave the only guest room to Hannah while she settled on the small sofa in the living room. She closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind was on constant alert, trying to pick up any sound that might indicate danger. Hours passed, and fatigue finally began to weigh on her. But before she could fall asleep, a distant sound made her open her eyes. Something was happening outside, something Laura couldn't identify. She got up, carefully going to the window, trying to see what was going on. Outside, in the shadows of the dimly lit street, Laura could see movements of strange people who seemed to move with a clear purpose. Laura's heart raced, and she knew, at that moment, that the danger was closer than she had ever imagined. Laura's heart pounded as she remained motionless, watching the people moving in the shadows outside. The darkness of the night seemed to conceal dangerous secrets, and each movement seemed to herald imminent disaster. Laura knew that Hannah's safety depended on her ability to stay calm, to act quickly and decisively. She stepped away from the window, her entire body tense. She needed to act, but with each passing second, fear and uncertainty grew. Whatever was happening outside was a real threat. Detective Morgan's words echoed in her mind. Influential people. People with power, willing to do whatever was necessary to silence Hannah and protect their own interests. Laura took a deep breath, trying to calm her thoughts before heading to the room where Hannah was. She opened the door slowly, finding the young woman sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. There was an emptiness in her eyes, as if she were on the verge of giving up, as if every drop of energy had been drained. "Hannah," Laura began, trying not to alarm her but aware of the urgency. "I need you to get up. Something is happening outside, and we need to leave here now." Hannah's eyes widened in panic. "What? They found us? How? What are we going to do?" Laura held her hands, trying to convey the strength she knew they would both need. "I don't know if they found us, but we can't take the risk. We're going to leave through the back door and try to get to the car. I have a plan." They moved quickly, the fear visible in every gesture, but the determination keeping them moving. They descended the stairs as quietly as possible, avoiding any noise that might alert whoever was outside. Laura opened the back door, observing the darkness that stretched beyond the small yard. The silence was terrible, as if the world were holding its breath. They reached the car, an old, unremarkable model that Laura used for her daily tasks. As soon as they got in, Laura locked the doors, the sound of the locks echoing as a temporary relief. She put the key in the ignition but hesitated for a second, feeling a weight in her chest. She knew that the moment she started the car, they would be exposing their location. But there was no time for doubts. She turned the key, and the engine roared to life, breaking the silence of the night. Laura accelerated, driving through the dark streets of the neighborhood as discreetly as possible. The danger still seemed to linger in the air, but the distance they were beginning to put between them and that house slightly eased the tension. As they drove, Laura realized that something was changing inside her. Up until that moment, she had been driven mainly by the instinct to protect, by the desire to do what was right. But now, seeing Hannah's growing trust in her, Laura felt a deeper connection. Hannah was not just a wealthy young woman in danger. She was a wounded person, betrayed by those she trusted, and Laura knew it was more than an obligation to keep her safe. It was a personal mission. Finally, they reached Samantha's small country house, an old friend of Laura's. The place was remote, surrounded by nature, with only a few lights on indicating that someone was home. Samantha, a middle-aged woman with gray hair and a warm smile, greeted them with a hug. That night, Laura and Hannah finally got some rest. The tension that had pursued them began to dissipate, but the trauma was still present, especially for Hannah. Before going to bed, Laura went to the room where Hannah was. The young woman was awake, staring at the ceiling, her eyes full of unspoken questions and fears. "I know it's hard right now," Laura said, sitting beside her. "But you're going to get through this, Hannah. You're stronger than you think." The morning arrived slowly, bringing with it a sense of relief that Laura hadn't felt in days. The soft sound of birds singing outside Samantha's house was a peaceful melody, contrasting with the chaos that had dominated Laura and Hannah's lives in recent days. The sun timidly peeked over the horizon, casting a golden light over the rural landscape, as if trying to erase the shadows of the recent past. Laura woke up early, as usual, but this time, she felt a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced in a long time. She got up slowly, her muscles still stiff from the accumulated tension, and went to the kitchen, where Samantha was already making coffee. The strong, comforting aroma filled the air, and Laura felt a rare moment of peace. Shortly after, Hannah appeared in the kitchen, her steps soft, as if she were still adjusting to the safe environment. Her eyes, although marked by fatigue and trauma, carried a lightness that Laura hadn't seen since the beginning of this journey. It was as if, finally, a ray of hope was beginning to break through the darkness that surrounded her. "Good morning, Hannah," Laura said, handing her a cup of coffee. "How did you sleep?" Hannah took the cup with trembling hands but managed to muster a small smile. "It was the first time in days that I could really sleep," she confessed, her voice a bit hoarse but full of sincerity. "I think it was the first time I felt safe since it all started." Laura felt a lump in her throat but managed to disguise it, focusing on the coffee. "That's a good sign, Hannah. We're taking one step at a time, and that's the most important thing right now." The three women sat at the table, sharing a simple breakfast, but for Laura, it felt like a feast after everything they had faced. There was something deeply restorative about that moment, something that resonated in the depths of her soul. The danger still existed, but for now, it was distant, and in that isolated space, Laura felt they could afford a brief respite. In the middle of the meal, Laura's phone rang. It was Detective Morgan. "Miss Laura," Morgan began, his voice firm but with a tone that Laura couldn't immediately decipher. "I have good news. We managed to arrest the main suspects during the night. They were located in a hideout on the outskirts of the city and didn't have time to react. We're now in the process of interrogating them, but I believe the situation is close to being resolved." Laura closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the news to sink in. A deep relief filled her, and she felt a wave of gratitude that everything had worked out. "That's incredible, Detective. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." "Thanks aren't necessary," Morgan replied. "The most important thing is that Miss Hannah is safe. We'll keep you informed about the next steps. But I wanted you to know that she's out of immediate danger. You can start thinking about what to do next without this constant threat." After the call, Laura shared the news with Hannah and Samantha, and Hannah's reaction was a mix of relief and doubt. For so long, she had lived with the constant fear that her life could end at any moment, that now, upon learning she was finally safe, she could hardly believe it. One morning, while walking through the fields around the house, Hannah finally shared her thoughts with Laura. "I've been thinking a lot about what I'm going to do now," she began, her voice calm but full of determination. "I don't want to go back to the life I had before, at least not in the same way." Laura looked at her, waiting for her to continue. "I've always lived surrounded by wealth and privilege," Hannah said, her gaze lost in the landscape ahead. "But I've realized that it means nothing if you don't have something real, something that makes a difference in people's lives. I want to use this fortune to create something that really matters. Something that helps people in vulnerable situations like I was." Time passed, and with Laura's help, Hannah established her foundation, aimed at supporting victims of violence and offering refuge and resources to those in desperate situations. Hannah's journey of overcoming was painful and full of challenges. But in the end, she found a new purpose, a new reason to live. And so, two lives that crossed in such an unexpected way continued together, creating something bigger, something that would impact the lives of many others. Hannah and Laura's story was not just about survival. It was about the human capacity to turn suffering into strength, to find hope even in the darkest situations, and to believe that, even when everything seems lost, there is always a light waiting to guide the way.